Injury hackers, this is your real superpower. Hey, I'm Sarah from mostmotion, and I'm here with another video for every sports and fitness coach who wants to help with those minor aches and pains with their clients. They want to help them avoid injury and get out of the cycle of being in chronic pain. So, what are you looking at? Well, this is the matrix of possibility. This is essentially the three different people that we have involved in any given injury situation. So we have the individual themselves who may or may not have any anatomy interest. They might understand anatomy in layman's terms, so they might be able to understand things like hamstring, or they might be a complete detail junkie and totally obsessed with learning everything they can about the injury they have had, because usually this happens when the questions that they've had in the past don't get answered, or the injury keeps coming back over and over again. People want to learn more about the injury itself, why it keeps happening, and if those questions don't get answered, then they become more detail junkie orientated, okay? So for me, that is just being obsessed with learning every little detail they possibly can. And coaches follow the same vein. So coaches themselves, sports coaches, can have no anatomy interest whatsoever. They might be, I don't know, parent volunteers, for example. They might have busy lives. They might not care in the slightest. They just enjoy coaching for the once a week that they coach or whatever. So they might not have any anatomy interest. They, again, might understand it in layman's terms, or they might be completely obsessed with learning everything they can about injuries and anatomy. And therapists are all detail junkies, okay? Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the area of musculoskeletal injuries. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about therapists who are involved in sports injuries. So those therapists are all madly detailed about or madly interested in the detail of the injury itself, is what's happening to the body. But that does not necessarily mean it translates into any kind of sporting interest. So they might have no interest in the sport whatsoever. And that makes communication very difficult. So they might have a mild interest in the sport, or they might be completely mad about the sport. Now, the way the industry works right now is that the current education system available to coaches and therapists is basically they have to be really, really detail orientated. So that only works well if you have an individual who really wants to understand what's happening with their bodies. You have a coach who's really interested in injury, and oftentimes it works best with a therapist who is totally mad about the sport. So it's only working well in this area, which means that all of these people are completely left out of this situation, because communication between these groups of people is very, very difficult. If you have a therapist who totally understands everything there is to know about injury, but doesn't have any interest in the sport, it's very difficult for them to explain it in terms of the sport to the person involved. And the reason this is a huge problem is because of the way that the system is set up. It's basically set up like this. So we have the individual here, we have the coach here, and we have the therapist here. Oftentimes, coaches and therapists don't communicate very well, okay? They don't have the time, they don't have the ability to do that. So it's all translated. Communication goes this way to the individual, and then the individual then has to relay it best they can to the other professionals involved. So if the individual does not understand anything about anatomy, or they are only understanding it in layman's terms, then that means that the professionals are only getting a half understood, half remembered version of what's going on in that person's life. So that means that there's lots and lots of gaps in the treatment. There's lots and lots of gaps in what's happening with the client, because the individual doesn't necessarily remember, and the system puts all that emphasis on the individual itself. But when we take away the education around the injury itself, and we start giving education around things that everybody can do, so we break injuries down into very, very simple terms, like we do with injury hacking, Injuries are essentially just painful movement, okay? So all this is focusing on painful movement, but all of this is focusing on non-painful movement, okay? Now, because injuries are painful movement, and the therapists and the detail junkie people, the certified specialist injury coaches are focusing on the painful movement itself, but there's an awful lot of scope for the people who can focus on the non-painful injuries and the non-painful movement. And the reason for that is because the coaches here are in a unique position, because therapists, doctors, the medical professions are only ever privy to the client, see the client when the pain has happened. But coaches are in a unique position because they get to see the client before the pain happens. So if all these people knew what to look for, the signs of those injuries coming, then we could get somewhere with preventing injuries. And if we had a system that would allow the coaches and the therapists to communicate regardless of where they were on here, so they could find more people. So this therapist could have links with lots of different coaches, and this coach could have lots of links with coaches and therapists. They could create a little team of people that essentially then communicates one or two things to the individual. I hope that makes sense to you. I know my drawings are a bit confusing sometimes, but if the coaches have the ability to learn, again, funny drawing, learning, if they have the ability to learn more about the signs and the symptoms of the injuries before they become painful, and they can understand how that manifests in movement problems and movement issues without the pain, then we have both sides of the story being dealt with. Then we can communicate much more easily, because the communication method then becomes movement rather than the communication method being injury itself. So essentially, this is what injury hacking is all about. This is what the Smart Coach Education series is all about. We teach smart coaches how to spot those signs of injuries and what movements to do to help with those that are non-painful, that's not going to infringe on anybody's treatments or anything like that. And if you want to know more about that, or you want to come and join us, you want to learn, get yourself involved with other people in a similar idea, then come and join us at injuryhackers.com. It's a free Facebook group, and you will learn all the tips and tricks and shortcuts and stuff like that that you can do if you're a coach that is wanting to help out with these injuries. So I'm Sarah from Most Motion. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.